It is so incredibly easy to just walk outside, look up at the sky, and see like a flock of birds flying by in that perfect little V formation and just feel absolutely nothing.
Yeah, totally. It's just background noise.
Right. It is so ordinary, so commonplace, that it essentially becomes invisible to us. We just accept it as part of the scenery.
I mean, it is the ultimate biological mystery hiding in plain sight. It's like a screensaver for the real world that we have just stopped questioning.
But if you actually stop for a second, if you really pause and think about the mechanics of what you are looking at, that V formation stops looking like background noise. I mean, think about what is actually happening up there.
It's pretty wild when you break it down.
You have these tiny, fragile creatures navigating thousands of miles across oceans and continents, and they're completely devoid of a map, a compass, or, a GPS. When you look at the raw data of what they are achieving, it starts looking like an absolute impossibility. It is an engineering marvel that just completely defies logic.
Yeah.
And honestly, how you view that flock of birds might actually dictate how you view your own existence.
That's a really big statement, but yeah.
Are we all just lucky biological accidents, or is there an invisible, purposeful architecture to our lives, just like the air currents in the sky?
And that exact sense of wonder, that realization of the impossible happening right above our heads, is the foundation of what we are unpacking today.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled to have you with us because today we're exploring a truly fascinating, highly philosophical text by an author named Sue F.N.
It's a really dense piece of work.
It is. The text is called "There is a Supernatural Soul in the Universe, Medica 40 Evidence Proving the Existence of the Greatest Creator." It is this massive, sweeping ideological framework. But our mission today is to zero in on just one specific piece of the puzzle. We are looking at Chapter 30, which focuses entirely on the staggering mysteries of bird migration.
And before we get into the biological weeds here, it is vital to set a ground rule for our deep dive today.
Yes, very important.
As you can probably guess from the title, this text makes some very strong theological and ideological claims. The author is actively arguing for the existence of a greatest creator by highlighting the limitations and the blind spots of conventional science.
Right.
Now, for you listening, we want to be incredibly clear. We are not here to take a side.
No, we are absolutely leaving our own beliefs at the door.
Precisely. We are simply acting as your impartial guides today. We want to explore how the author uses these genuinely mind-bending biological facts to build a compelling, structured argument against the modern scientific consensus.
It really is a masterclass in using the physical natural world to ask massive existential questions.
It really is.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to get to those massive existential questions, the author actually starts with a moment that is so relatable, so entirely mundane, that you've probably experienced something exactly like it.
Oh, definitely.
We are zooming all the way in, moving from the cosmic scale of the universe's creation down to, of all places, a dusty petrol station in Zimbabwe.
It is a brilliant juxtaposition, honestly. He doesn't start in a laboratory or a monastery. He starts in a traffic jam.
Right. So picture the scene. This is the origin story for the chapter. The author is sitting in his car. It is the turn of the rainy and dry season in Zimbabwe, and there happens to be a severe petrol shortage.
So he's just stuck.
Exactly. He is stuck in this incredibly long queue at a service station. It is hot, he is bored out of his mind, and he's just trying to kill time. Suddenly, he hears this massive commotion. He looks at his car window and sees about a dozen crow-like birds perched in a large tree nearby.
Just making a racket.
Yeah, they're flapping their wings frantically, making this deafening caw-cawing sound.
Which, at first glance, is just a standard, everyday nuisance when you were trying to read a book or listen to the radio in your car.
The author even jokes about it. He writes that out of pure boredom, he starts analyzing them, wondering if they're having like a board meeting to discuss a new corporate project. Right. But then, the behavior starts to escalate. Those initial frantic calls seem to be a signal, attracting more birds from the surrounding area. And then more birds. Within half an hour, nearly 1,000 of these birds have swarmed into the branches of this single tree.
And the author describes the sequence of events next in a way that shifts the tone from mundane to genuinely strange.
Yeah, it's weird.
This massive, chaotic flock suddenly leaves the tree in unison and begins to hover. They fly in these tight, rising circles, spiraling higher and higher into the sky like a giant, dark tornado.
And again, his initial reaction is so delightfully human. He is looking up through his windshield, wondering, are they throwing a party? Is this some kind of avian Miss International flight pageant to see who is the most elegant?
I love that line.
He literally gets out of his car and stands on the grass just to watch them, trying to see who can fly the highest.
But the punchline to this spectacle is what changes everything for him. The birds that reach the absolute highest altitude suddenly catch something totally invisible to the human eye.
Wow.
They abruptly stop circling, snap into a formation, and shoot off to the northwest in a perfectly straight line.
Just like that.
Just like that. And as the lower birds in the spiral eventually reach that exact same altitude, they hit that invisible threshold and do the exact same thing. The author compares it to boarding a train and riding away on a fixed, invisible railway track in the sky.
They were catching a high-altitude air current. They were intelligently using the invisible atmospheric architecture of the sky to do the heavy lifting for their journey.
Exactly.
And that is the exact moment the light bulb goes off for the author.
Yeah.
It is his petrol station epiphany, basically.
Yeah.
He realizes these are migratory birds, and this highly coordinated, deeply intelligent behavior sparks a curiosity that just sends him down a massive research rabbit hole.
What's fascinating here is how that single moment of observation propels him to look at the broader mechanical logistics of global bird migration. Because, if you think catching a thermal updraft in Zimbabwe is impressive, the global statistics he uncovers are, from a purely biological standpoint, almost physically impossible.
Yeah, so what exactly did he find when he started looking deeper? Because when he started pulling on this thread, the data he compiled forces you to rethink what a biological organism is actually capable of.
It really does. He compiles a list of physical feats that, quite frankly, shouldn't be achievable by creatures made of hollow bones and feathers.
Right.
For instance, he points to the Arctic terns. These birds build their nests up in the Arctic Circle. At the turn of summer and autumn, they take off and fly all the way down to the South Pole.
Wait, all the way to the South Pole?
All the way. Then the next year, they fly all the way back. That is an annual round trip of 35,200 kilometers.
That is almost the entire circumference of the Earth. Every single year.
Every year. And he also looks at European white storks flying 12,800 kilometers to spend the winter in South Africa.
Unbelievable.
Or New Zealand long-tailed cuckoos crossing 6,400 kilometers of open ocean to reach highly specific, tiny Pacific islands.
Hitting a tiny island in the middle of the ocean is just, that's crazy.
He mentions seagulls from the Isle of Man in Wales migrating to Brazil. To pull that off, they have to cover over 700 kilometers a day for 16 consecutive days.
Let that sink in for a second if you're listening. No rest days, no stopping to recuperate, just waking up and flying the equivalent of driving from London to Germany every single day for over 2 weeks.
Furthermore, it is not just the sheer distance, it is the altitude and the atmospheric conditions. He notes wild geese that fly directly over the Himalayas at an altitude of 9,000 meters.
9,000 meters.
Right. For context, 9,000 meters is the cruising altitude of a commercial Boeing jetliner. The air is so incredibly thin up there, and the temperatures are so far below freezing, that human climbers need heavy parkas and supplemental oxygen just to avoid dying, let alone exert the immense cardiovascular energy required to fly.
It's just mind-boggling. But out of all the examples the author meticulously lists, the one that absolutely stopped me in my tracks was the black-poll warbler.
Oh, that one is wild.
I want to put a spotlight on this specific bird because it really crystallizes the author's sense of disbelief and sets up his philosophical argument. The black-poll warbler is incredibly tiny. It weighs about 20-odd grams. To put that in your hand, that is the weight of a single AA battery.
It is unimaginably small for the journey it undertakes.
Yeah. Before autumn hits, this tiny battery-sized bird flies from Alaska down to the east coast of North America, like New England, specifically to gorge itself on food. It is essentially refueling, building up fat reserves. Then, when the cold sets in, it takes off over the Atlantic Ocean, it finds an air current, turns south toward Brazil, and just flies. The journey is roughly 3,840 kilometers, often at altitudes of over 6,000 meters.
Wow.
And here's the truly staggering part. It does this for 4 days and 4 nights, non-stop.
96 straight hours of constant, relentless physical exertion.
Think about the mechanics of this. This is like packing a tiny, lightweight toy car with just enough fuel to drive all the way across the country. But the strict rule of this road trip is you can never, ever take your foot off the gas pedal, and you can never stop the car for 4 days straight.
That is a great analogy.
Because if the engine stutters, or if you calculate the fuel-to-weight ratio wrong by even a fraction of a percent, the car drops into the ocean. It's a thermodynamic nightmare, yet this 20-gram bird executes it flawlessly.
And the author uses these statistics to point out that the physical endurance alone defies basic reason. But as he dives deeper into the research, he realizes the physical stamina is actually the less confusing part of the equation.
Really? How was that the less confusing part?
Because having the raw horsepower to fly is just one part of the puzzle. Horsepower is completely useless without a steering wheel and a map. Knowing exactly where to go is something else entirely.
Ah, right. Which brings us to the real puzzle that drives this chapter, the navigation mystery. Physical endurance is one thing, but cognitive direction is another.
Exactly. And the author presents one specific piece of evidence that he finds utterly baffling, and it has to do with juvenile birds, the babies. He points out that with many species, like the cuckoo, the older generations actually start their migration journey earlier than the young ones. They just leave.
Wait, they completely abandon the kids before the hardest journey of their lives?
Essentially, yes. The smaller, younger cuckoos start their migration a few days or even weeks later. So you have these juvenile birds, totally unaccompanied by their parents, making their very first flight across the globe to a strange place they have never seen, smelled, or been to.
That is insane.
And yet, they fly there unerringly and reunite with their parents at the exact destination. He also notes that young starlings actually do the reverse. They set off earlier than their parents, flying entirely blind, and still arrive perfectly on their own.
It is genuinely spooky when you think about it. And the author also brings up the sheer, localized precision of this navigation. He mentions a detail about swallows in a small American town, likely San Juan Capistrano, that are famous for returning to the exact same nests they built the year prior.
Not just the same region.
No, not just the same zip code, the exact same mud nest under the exact same eave of a building. And supposedly, they arrive at dawn on March 29th every single year, like absolute clockwork.
It is an unparalleled level of both geographical and temporal precision.
So if you are listening to this right now, put yourself in the author's shoes. Ask yourself the core questions he's grappling with. How do these tiny birds know the weather is turning cold thousands of miles away? How do they know which specific day is mathematically safe to take off? How do they find invisible air currents thousands of meters in the sky? And without their parents guiding them, how do they look at a featureless, terrifying expanse of ocean and just not get lost?
And these are the exact questions that drive the author to look at the scientific consensus. He researches how evolutionary biologists and ornithologists explain these phenomena. He identifies 4 major scientific arguments, and then, systematically, he attempts to dismantle every single one of them to prove that these scientific explanations are, in his words, fanciful and groundless.
I want to walk through how he deconstructs the science here because he pulls absolutely no punches.
He really doesn't.
So the first scientific mechanism he targets is the idea of biological clocks and celestial navigation. Now, science tells us that birds have internal circadian rhythms sensing the changing of the seasons. But more impressively, science suggests they actually use the stars. They calculate the position of the sun during the day and the constellations at night, essentially reading the night sky to constantly adjust their flight angle and stay on course.
It is a beautiful scientific theory, but the author counters it with a mix of humor and blunt pragmatism. He points out that migratory birds have brains the size of a little finger, or even smaller.
Yeah, tiny.
He asks, is it really logical to assume this tiny organic computer is calculating complex, high-altitude airflow dynamics and celestial geometric angles without any instruments? He jokes that if this is true, migratory birds are significantly smarter than Albert Einstein.
Smarter than Einstein, yeah.
To him, the idea that a tiny brain can do organic trigonometry without a compass, a sextant, or a calculator makes this explanation mythological.
He just completely rejects the idea of a bird doing advanced calculus in midair. So if the stars are too complex for a tiny brain, maybe they just read their immediate surroundings. Which leads to the second scientific argument. He critiques the inherent meteorologist theory.
Right, the weather theory.
Exactly. This is the scientific idea that birds are intimately tuned in to meteorological conditions. Biologists believe birds can read the minute changes in temperature, wind direction, barometric pressure, and even low-frequency sounds of crashing waves, using all that data to find ascending air currents and save energy.
And his counter-argument to that is strictly about risk management. He argues that if this were true, it would mean birds are more knowledgeable than all the scientists, satellites, and supercomputers at meteorological bureaus worldwide combined.
Which is a funny way to put it.
But his main critique is highly practical. If they solely relied on reading the weather as they go, then a sudden, abnormal weather event would be fatal.
Oh, sure.
If a cold front didn't materialize exactly when they needed it, they would miss their crucial air current and plunge into the sea. Relying on unpredictable, shifting weather patterns is far too risky a strategy to guarantee a species' survival year after year.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. If the weather is too unpredictable, you need a map that never changes, regardless of rain or shine. Which leads us to the third scientific argument, and this is the one you hear on almost every nature documentary: geomagnetism.
Ah, the magnetic field.
Yes. Science suggests birds actually use the Earth's magnetic field as an invisible grid. We now know birds have special proteins in their eyes called cryptochromes, which means they might literally see magnetic field as a chemical reaction, almost like an augmented reality heads-up display overlaying the world.
Now, the author doesn't necessarily attack the concept of a magnetic compass directly. Rather, he attacks the incompleteness of the theory.
Awesome.
He states that even if they possess a biological magnetic heads-up display to tell them north from south, that does absolutely nothing to explain how a bird can detect the existence of an invisible air current thousands of meters up in the sky. Geomagnetism doesn't help you find wind, it just tells you which direction you are facing.
Right. It gives you the direction, but not the ride.
Exactly. So, for him, the theory completely falls short of explaining the full mechanical picture of migration.
It provides the compass, but not the engine. Which brings us to the fourth scientific argument. This is the foundational one, and where the author spends the most time: evolution and genetics. The deeply held scientific belief that over millions of years of brutal trial and error, birds gradually learned the rules of seasonal climates, formed fixed migratory patterns through accumulated survival experience, and passed this successful map down genetically to succeeding generations.
To dismantle this, he starts by laying out the accepted scientific timeline to make a very specific point. He notes that scientists say the Earth is roughly 4.6 billion years old. Invertebrates appeared 438 million years ago. Fish, 380 million, amphibians, 290 million, reptiles, 245 million. The dinosaurs died out 135 million years ago. Mammals appeared 65 million years ago, and humans a mere 1.6 million years ago.
Okay, so he is establishing that birds, or their evolutionary ancestors, have been around for hundreds of millions of years, a vastly longer timeline than humans.
Exactly. And here is his primary critique. He says, let's assume the scientific dating is entirely reliable. If birds have existed for hundreds of millions of years, and they are intelligent enough to genetically encode how to navigate the globe, find favorable habitats, and perfectly utilize complex air currents, why haven't they evolved into more advanced animals over those millions of years?
Interesting. So he views evolution as a trajectory with an end goal.
He asks, why are humans who have only been here a fraction of the time taking over the planet? Why are these incredibly intelligent birds still getting caught in primitive human nets and shot by air guns? He genuinely asks the scientific community, did birds just decide they didn't want to evolve anymore, or did they hit some kind of biological roadblock in their evolution?
I have to step in here and offer a bit of biological pushback on the author's premise, because this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how evolutionary science actually works.
Yeah, let's hear it.
The author is viewing evolution as a ladder, where every animal is constantly trying to climb up and become more advanced, with the unspoken assumption that advance means something closer to human intelligence, tool building, or global dominance.
He assumes the end goal of nature is human-like supremacy.
Exactly. But in evolutionary biology, evolution isn't a ladder you climb to reach a specific destination. It is simply a process of adaptation to your immediate environment. If a bird is perfectly adapted to its environment, if it can successfully reproduce, find food, and survive by flying to Brazil every winter using the Earth's magnetic field, then that bird is an absolute staggering evolutionary success.
Right. It doesn't need to change.
It hasn't hit a roadblock. It simply doesn't need to evolve into a creature that builds cities or dodges human nets to be considered biologically successful.
That is a crucial distinction to make. The author views their physical vulnerability to humans as a glaring flaw in the evolutionary theory, whereas an evolutionary biologist would view their millions of years of unchanged survival as definitive proof of the theory's success.
Totally.
But the author has one more philosophical paradox he throws at the theory of evolution to break it down.
Oh, the ultimate chicken and egg scenario.
Exactly. He references an earlier section of his philosophical work, asking a very simple question. How did the very first chick, hatched from the very first egg on Earth, know how to break its shell?
Oh.
It couldn't have inherited shell-breaking skills from an ancestor because, by definition, it was the first. So he applies that exact same paradox to migratory birds. How did the first bird know how to migrate across the ocean before the experience could be accumulated and passed down? How do you survive the first trip if you don't have the map yet? For the author, this paradox utterly breaks the evolutionary model of accumulated knowledge.
So the author has looked at the biological clocks, the intricate weather theories, the quantum magnetic fields, and the millions of years of evolutionary trial and error, and he's declared all of them completely insufficient to explain how a baby cuckoo flies alone to the other side of the planet. So what does this all mean? Where does he actually land?
This brings us to the core thesis of the chapter. The author concludes that if you don't believe in the greatest creator, you are forced into what he calls thinking randomly.
Thinking randomly.
Yeah. You are forced to accept massive biological mysteries that will remain unsolved for 10,000 years. For him, the only logical, mechanical answer to bird migration is instinct. But he defines instinct very differently than a biologist would.
How does his definition change the game?
He defines instinct as a feature explicitly programmed into a species with a definite, unchangeable purpose by a supernatural power. Nature, in his view, has rigid, definite purposes for everything so that species don't die out. It is a top-down, intelligent design, not a bottom-up accumulation of happy accidents. Think of it like computer firmware.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's like the birds aren't learning anything over millions of years. They are simply operating on pre-installed firmware that cannot be overwritten or altered.
Yeah.
Nature is a closed-loop operating system.
That is exactly his argument, and he uses some wonderfully absurd contrast to illustrate this point about the rigid parameters of the creator's design.
Like what's...
He asks rhetorical questions to show what would happen if the supernatural power hadn't designated specific locked-in traits. He asks, what if tigers could dominate the mountains and fly in the sky?
Oh boy.
What if mice dug holes but also decided to build nests in trees? What if dogs could give birth to puppies and lay eggs? What if apple trees bore apples and heavy watermelons?
The visual of a massive watermelon hanging from a tiny apple tree branch is ridiculous, but it perfectly highlights his point. From his perspective, the natural world isn't a chaotic mashup of random mutations where anything can happen. It is heavily partitioned. Every species stays in its highly specific functional lane, purposefully designed by a creator to maintain order.
And to provide a final, undeniable piece of evidence for this supernatural mathematical design, he actually pivots away from birds for a moment at the end of the chapter and brings in a geometrical proof from nature, bees. Specifically, he looks at the architecture of the honeycomb.
This is where the math gets genuinely mind-blowing.
It really does. He points out that bees universally build their honeycombs with a rhombus bottom consisting of highly specific, unvarying angles. Exactly 109.288 degrees for the obtuse angles and 70.32 degrees for the acute angles.
And the reason he brings this up isn't just because it's a neat, fun fact. There is deep physics and geometry behind those specific numbers.
Right.
In the 18th century, mathematicians actually calculated the most optimal, efficient shape to hold the maximum amount of liquid honey while using the absolute minimum amount of building material wax. And the mathematical answer they arrived at was a rhombus with angles of 109.28 and 70.32 degrees. The bees are universally building the most mathematically perfect structure possible.
That is his ultimate point. How does a bee know advanced spatial geometry? For the author, that kind of microscopic mathematical perfection repeated endlessly across the globe cannot be the result of a random, unguided, trial-and-error evolutionary process.
It's too perfect.
Right. It is the undeniable signature of a super wisdom. Just like the baby cuckoo's flawless navigation across a featureless ocean, it is programmed, divine firmware.
Well, this has been quite the intellectual journey today. We started in the sweltering heat of a dusty service station in Zimbabwe, watching common birds catch a breeze, and we ended up dissecting the advanced spatial geometry of a honeycomb to argue for the existence of a supernatural soul in the universe.
The author is a master at using the awe-inspiring realities of the natural world, like a tiny 20-gram blackpoll warbler burning fat over an ocean for 96 straight hours, to force a profound philosophical confrontation. He uses these biological miracles to argue that conventional science simply falls short of providing the how, pointing instead to a prearranged supernatural design.
It is a deeply provocative way to view the natural world. And as we synthesize all of this and wrap up our deep dive, there's one final thought that emerges from this text that I think is worth chewing on long after you finish listening. It is a question about language itself.
Yes. The author ultimately attributes these breathtaking biological miracles to instinct, an instinct granted top-down by a supernatural creator. Science, on the other hand, attributes these exact same miracles to instinct, an instinct forged bottom-up by millions of years of genetic evolution.
Both sides, despite being ideologically opposed, are forced to use the exact same word.
So the question to ponder is this. Does using the word instinct, no matter what your ideological background is, actually explain the mechanical reality of how a baby bird navigates across the globe? Or is instinct simply a comforting catch-all label that we slap onto a profound mystery because, if we are being truly honest, we still don't fully comprehend how it is actually happening?
That is a phenomenal question to sit with. The next time you walk outside, look up and see that perfect V formation of birds gliding silently across the sky. Ask yourself what that word really means. Are you watching a biological algorithm or a divine miracle? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking up, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the wonders of the world around you.